Well, welcome everybody. This is the second in our Freshwater Quality Research Programme seminar series that we're doing, and we hope to run these monthly through the duration of the programme. So the Freshwater Quality Programme has a champion team, and myself and Professor Pippa Chapman at the University of Leeds head up that champion team based in Water at Leeds. So the programme as a whole, which is funded by the Natural Environment Research Council with support as well, funding from DEFRA, has a number of objectives, and it really is around strengthening our understanding of the sources and behaviour of pollutants within freshwater systems, within river systems, increasing our knowledge and understanding of how pollutants are changing and interacting with each other, and the impacts of those interactions. And really, we want to use this research to then, actually improve water quality. So we want to reduce pollutant loading, we want to inform policy, and, essentially enhance the ecological status of UK rivers. And thinking about that, it involves, not just thinking about kind of whole water systems management, but future forecasting as well, so that we can embed climate change implications and so on into our holistic understanding. Next slide, please, Finn. So the programme as a whole has 5 large projects within it, and each of those are listed on the screen, and they're really exciting projects with large teams tackling key issues and drivers around freshwater quality. And the intention is that for the programme as a whole, we wanted to not just be, this bunch of projects, but actually to really engage with the broader freshwater quality community. And that's one of the reasons why we're running this webinar series, because we feel that in addition to hearing from each of the projects in terms of their updates, it's really important that we hear from other projects operating in this space and build the community, the engaged community across the research, the policy community and the practice community, the NGO community, and so on. It's really important to have that kind of co-development and cross-dissemination of flow of information and knowledge. So that's really important to us. So yeah, next slide, please, Finn. So ultimately, by enhancing our understanding and working together, we really hope that that the science evidence can inform improvements to UK freshwater quality. So if you want to know or get involved a bit more in the programme, there's an email address if you ever want to contact us. There's a website as well, and there's a whole series of sort of video links that come off that website and further information about each of the projects. There's an X stream as well, and you can quickly get to the website by just scanning the QR code that's on screen there as well. So next slide, please, Finn. So just to give you a bit of a feel for what's coming up in the schedule, today we're really lucky. We've got Michelle Walker from the Rivers Trust, who's going to tell us about the CaSTCo project, which I think is an absolutely amazing project. And there'll be a chance to obviously ask Michelle questions and so on a bit later on as well. On the 6th of December, we've got Magdalena Bierosa, who's from the Swedish Agricultural University, and she's going to tell us about some of her work on high-resolution water quality sampling, and also some of the work she's been doing looking at water quality research gaps and some of the kind of solutions around water quality. So that's exciting as well. So we're looking forward to hearing from her. And then in the new year, we've then got a kind of monthly set of updates. So from each of the projects within the programme, there's an opportunity for us to hear about updates. The projects are now, well, by then we'll certainly be around a year or more old. So it's a great opportunity for us to hear about how progress is developing, what the findings are from each of those projects, sort of a year into their work. So that's the plan. So fantastic that we've got Michelle here with us today from the Rivers Trust. Michelle is Technical Director at the Rivers Trust. and we'll happily hand over to you, Michelle, to hear all about CaSTCo.
Thanks very much, Joe. Just bring my slides up. Hopefully you can see that okay.
Yes, we can.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, and really nice to be here today, and yeah, looking forward to telling you all about the CaSTCo project and answering any questions you have. So just a little bit about my role in the Rivers Trust. So we head up, myself and Dave Johnson are the technical directors of a team of 14 techie staff in the Rivers Trust, and we are the umbrella body of the Rivers Trust movement. So our team provides technical support, GIS modelling, monitoring, all sorts of technical expertise to our member trusts, but also to the wider catchment-based approach partnerships as well. So we put together things like the CABA data package that probably a lot of people on the call will use. And we run the CDUG forum, the Catchment Data User Group forum, that's coming up in December in Birmingham. And yeah, just try and sort of share data and evidence and tools as widely as possible. So I'm here today to talk about a project that we're involved with over these next 3 years. I'm going to start off by giving you a bit of background to why the project exists in the first place, and then talk a bit about what it's trying to achieve. And then I've got some sort of examples of some of the things we've been working on over the first year or so of the project. So what is the problem that CaSTCo is trying to solve? Well, we know we've got a real problem when it comes to the evidence that we all use to target the measures and the interventions that we do, the sort of work that Rivers Trust and catchment partnerships are involved with, nature-based solutions and all of the sort of interventions that we're working on. That evidence base that we're using to target that work it was always thin, but it's getting thinner and thinner. So the statutory monitoring that goes on that underpins things like Water Framework Directive is reducing year on year. That evidence base also underpins billions of pounds worth of investment through the WINEP, through the water industry programme, and it's what we can use to underpin all of the sort of investment that we're starting to see coming through in terms of green finance and nature-based solutions. So we've got a real problem here. And that map on the right-hand side is the Team catchment, which is in the headwaters of the River Severn. And it shows the grey areas of the water bodies where there was no statutory orthophosphate monitoring by the EA in the whole of the last year. And, alongside that, it means there's no water quality monitoring, because pretty much there's always a orthophosphate sample taken when there's some water quality taken. And this is a picture we're seeing across the country. That monitoring is being targeted at sort of investigations, but there's no kind of eyes and ears on the ground in the rest of the catchments that aren't a priority. And, this is reflected in a lot of the information that we have around Water Framework Directive, like the reasons for not achieving good or RNAGS data. The uncertainties around the causes of the problems are really quite significant, particularly in the sort of main two sectors that can impact on the pollution and the water quality in our rivers, so water industry and agriculture. So, we've got a real evidence gap. And what we found is, throughout the time that I've been at the Rivers Trust, I've been here 13 years now, our member trusts have been filling those knowledge gaps locally with some really good monitoring, professional monitoring that paid staff are doing, but also citizen science involving the local community and volunteers, training them and getting them out, collecting really good data. And this is an example of a scheme from West Country Rivers Trust, the Citizen Science Investigations, or CSI programme. And they've got, I think now it's up to nearly 600 volunteers that are out regularly collecting water quality parameters and other data. And that feeds into a sort of assessment that they do and developing these catchment scorecards. And that data can be used for sort of baseline river health monitoring, but also then to target the work of the staff within the organisation, people like the farm advisors who go out with more sort of rigorous water quality monitoring kit and collect better data to really be able to target the sort of work that the trust do on things like engaging with farmers and funding farm interventions and providing farm advice and things like that. So there's a lot of that already going on across the Rivers Trust network and the wider catchment partnerships. And we've got a really good case study that was used as we sort of led up to the successful bid for the CaSTCo funding, which was the Petrol project up in Cumbria. So our commercial director, Amina Abubakar, who's seconded from United Utilities, led this project. And really the sort of background to this was that back when Storm Desmond decimated Cumbria with really bad flooding, at the same time, United Utilities were being required to invest £20 million removing phosphate from a small handful of rural sewage treatment works in the Petrol catchment. And both the local community were up in arms about this amount of money being spent when their homes have been decimated by flooding, but also many local stakeholders, including Eden Rivers Trust, who'd undertaken some sort of targeted work before this, were convinced that the modelling and the monitoring that had led to this decision were wrong, and that there was much more input of phosphate from things like septic tanks and agriculture that the modelling has to make really sort of broad sweeping estimates on, and they just felt that this was the wrong decision. So this project kicked off, and it was a partnership between lots of organisations, obviously United Utilities, but also Environment Agency, Natural England, the local authorities, university, as well as the NGOs and Eden Rivers Trust. And what they did was undertake a really detailed monitoring programme, and it involved everything from citizen science right through to really sophisticated real-time continuous monitoring. And that data was fed into the SAGES tool, which is the source apportionment GIS tool that underpins a lot of the decision-making on water company investment. And what they found was, rather than 80% of the phosphate coming from those few rural sewage treatment works, it was actually more like 20%, and the rest was coming from that diffuse load from septic tanks from agriculture. And what they were able to do, working with the Environment Agency and the other partners, was to get agreement that a lot of that funding could actually be spent on upstream measures, targeting the real sources of the problem. And, you know, those sort of measures, those on-farm measures and those upstream catchment nature-based solutions provide lots of other benefits, including reducing flood risk downstream. So this was a real sort of case study that we used in our lead up to developing what we wanted to do with our project. But why do we really have a problem? Why can't we just carry on doing those kind of approaches like West Country CSI and the Petrol project? The fact is they are fragmented. We don't have consistency across the country, and that is a real problem. Because we have lots of different data sources and lots of different data platforms that those data sources are held in, it's actually really hard to get that data into the hands of the decision makers and fed into those decision support tools. That messy diagram on the left-hand side there really kind of tells a picture, and it's actually much, much messier than that in reality. We've got so many different data sets out there. It's very hard technically to combine them. I mean, my background is GIS, so, you know, my role is trying to pull all of this data together and put it in people's hands. But not only is it technically challenging, because it's very hard to trace back and understand what the quality of the data is, and you know, there's no standardized frameworks and no standardized systems for that local data collection. The decision makers don't know if they can trust the data. and they don't know what decisions it's appropriate for underpinning. And that confusion, that confused picture is also a problem at the other end when local NGOs and communities want to undertake citizen science, but there's so many methods out there that they could use. How do they know where to start? So all of that sort of messy problem is really what CaSTCo is trying to start to tackle. So it is a Ofwat innovation funded project. So it was developed by out of the catchment data user group that I mentioned previously, which is a cross-sectoral group of people interested in catchment data and evidence. We started to pull a working group together a number of years ago now with the idea to propose and find funding for a catchment monitoring cooperative. So that's a sort of national coordinated citizen science scheme. And that's, we started to look around for funding possibilities, and we identified the Ofwat innovation stream. It ticked so many of the boxes from what the sort of Ofwat innovation strategy was looking to achieve. And we then coalesced with a number of other partners that were also looking to bid into the fund, where they were focusing more on the sort of decision support end of that chain, and turned it into the CaSTCo bid. So it went from being something that was just focused on citizen science to something now that's really looking at streamlining that whole flow of evidence from the gathering and organising of local evidence and standardising it right through to transforming it into information and knowledge and putting it into the hands of decision makers and making better decisions with it. And it's really based around this idea that if you can integrate different tiers of information, and the tiers correspond really to sort of different levels of rigor and expense and cost. So your sort of citizen science is the bottom tier, so that's high density. You can get lots and lots of spatial and temporal coverage across a wide area, and then integrate that through a weight of evidence approach with your more rigorous professional monitoring. But obviously, because it's more expensive and costly, and you need to train people to a higher level, you can't collect it over such a wide spatial and temporal coverage, right through to your tier 3 court case level evidence and your statutory monitoring. So that's what we're aiming to do, see what we can do if we standardise the approaches and the governance of citizen science, direct local funding in, because that was another key thing, getting sustainable funding to manage and coordinate citizen science locally, developing the support around that, the accredited training and the data integration systems, but really fundamentally looking at taking a weight of evidence approach and combining all of this information together. And the way that the project is structured, as well as working on that sort of national framework, we have got 8 demonstrator catchments, which are really going to be taking what we can develop through that national framework and applying it on the ground, but also, really importantly, feeding the kind of real world needs back to that national framework. So it's a co-design project. We are co-designing all of that that national standardization with the demo catchments, feeding in their knowledge. And each of these demos has a sort of starting theme, so we're making sure we've got enough of the different types of monitoring that happen on the ground covered in terms of what we're doing with the national framework. And they are also forming a community of practice. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning going on in the project with these 30 and growing partners. And each of them are really trying to share what they're learning, both with the national framework, but also with each other. It's an innovation project. We're supposed to make mistakes. That's the sort of number one lesson here. But as long as we capture those lessons learned really and share them. And some of the sort of things that they're trying at the moment as we spin the project up over this first year is benchmarking different types of equipment together. So, you know, comparing citizen science tests with lab tests and that sort of thing, and comparing how different methods are applied on the ground before we design and implement the standards. Looking at things like quality assurance protocols and Also looking at developing innovation, technical innovation, things like low-cost sensors, coupled with machine learning approaches to fill knowledge gaps, and figuring out how to, recruit and train and maintain volunteer interest as well. And what's happening in each of those catchments is we are ensuring that there's an active partnership. So the water company, the Environment Agency, and the CABA catchment partnership host organisation. So that's always an NGO, so generally either a Rivers Trust, a Wildlife Trust, or a community group. We're asking all of those and the sort of wider partners to work together and start developing collaborative monitoring plans, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And we are also at a national level engaging with the Environment Agency, so they are developing a whole sort of citizen science project thread, and they've got staff in their organisation now with dedicated time to interface both with these demos and wider citizen science activity. So this next slide is very busy. I'm not expecting anyone to read it, but it's just to give you a sense. This was a report summary that we produced from our latest quarterly sprint meeting. So we're taking an agile approach on this project, and we have sprints and then meet up every quarter and sort of bring all of our findings together. And this is, a summary of all of the activity that's been going on in those demos. And I'll draw some of this out now for you to give you a bit of a flavour of what's been going on so far. So I mentioned collaborative monitoring planning. That's a real keystone of what we're all about with CaSTCo. So one of the criticisms that has been levelled at a lot of citizen science and volunteer monitoring is that it's reactionary, or it can be skewed by political interests or local interests. So many of you will be familiar with the River Restoration Centre's Pragmo approach, which is all about smart objectives for monitoring. So we are adopting those principles into CaSTCo and asking each demo to sit down with those partners. So it's the water company, the EA, the NGO, and academia and community groups, and anyone who's already out collecting monitoring data. And we really want them to start planning strategically how those monitoring gaps are filled. And that starts with trying to set smart objectives they're monitoring. So this is an example from one of the collaborative monitoring plans. This template is directly from the Pragmo resources, which you can find on the River Restoration Centre's website. And it's great because it makes sure that any monitoring that is agreed in that partnership is linked to a clear monitoring question. What is it we're trying to ask, and how is that particular monitoring technique going to address that? And it's just a good discipline that really brings partners together. It helps to sort of unearth what monitoring is already happening, but then to be strategic about how you fill those knowledge gaps. And some of the partners are turning these monitoring plans into something more engaging and visually attractive that's great for them explaining what's going on to the wider community, particularly to the volunteers, because they can't just be seen as a data collection army. We've got to engage people properly in the science that they're contributing to, and part of that is explaining how their data is going to contribute to ultimately improving the health of our rivers on the ground. So in this example, those green circles are the monitoring questions that have been collaboratively agreed in the partnership. These are priorities based on using things like the CABA data package to identify what the issues are. The yellow boxes are then a bit more sort of digging down into what you actually want to monitor. And then the blue boxes are the methods that are going to be used. And those methods are then subject to the work that we're doing on the national framework, which I'll talk a bit more about in a second. So another thing that we're starting to do now is mapping some through a monitoring hub. This is just a prototype that we've developed for one of our member trusts, actually, but we're starting to adopt this through the CaSTCo project. And that's really about sharing what monitoring is already happening, which is very hard to pin down, actually. It's very hard to sort of see in one place what everyone's doing. So we're having a go at this, and we're developing some simple templates and simple metadata templates, pulling in data from places like the Environment Agency's Open WIMS and Biosys, and now starting to work with the providers of citizen science platforms like Cartographer to see, can we pull in things like Riverfly and other national schemes into here. And that's all part of within CaSTCo, we've got a data platforms and data systems work package, which is going to be looking at solving that messy bit of the diagram that you saw earlier of how we join all of this stuff up. Just a couple of examples from some of our demos. This is a newsletter that the Anglian demo, the Wenscombe subcatchment, put out to their volunteers. So it's sharing some of the information on the data validation that they've undertaken, where they were comparing citizen science phosphate tests using the HANA green eggs, for those of you who are familiar, with lab tests from UEA and the Environment Agency. And you can see there's quite a close correlation there, so that's encouraging. And that data then feeds into the national framework. And, sharing things like the data analysis and interpretation, and really trying to keep those volunteers engaged in the whole data process. And over in the US, which is our Welsh demo catchment, this is one of what we call our demo pluses. So when we came to submit the bid, we merged these other very similar projects, or aligned projects, I should say. We're focusing much more on the sort of how you turn data into action at the end of that process. And this is one of them. So we've got Cardiff University, YNUS Foundation, NRW, Welsh Water, working on starting to map out some of the partners and the projects and what those activities are addressing in terms of pressures in the catchment, and with a view to trying to get more joined up activity. And they've started mapping some of the interactions between all of these partners. And then this is the bit that, is really kind of where CaSTCo takes off, is what is the information flow between all of those? And, how is data and information being shared to underpin some of that planning and coordination? What they're starting to look at now is how can we make this a much more efficient process? And obviously, what they're learning from that really deep dive is then going to be fed up nationally and shared with the other partners as well. Over in the team on the Severn, one of our other demos, we've got Severn Rivers Trust, Severn Trent Water, NRW as well for the Welsh side of MEA, working together over here. There's a bathing waters focus in the team, so Severn Trent are doing a lot of continuous monitoring. But what Severn Rivers Trust are doing is looking at trialling some innovative techniques of citizen science to understand hotspots for bacterial water quality problems, and also do some source apportionment as well to better understand the health of the river, but also provide information for recreational users. They're out monitoring with citizen scientists. They've been trained up in the various protocols, and they are sending samples off to the lab, but also testing some lower cost bacterial water quality kits, and also undertaking some eDNA analysis that CEH are going to run. So that can tell us, whether the sources are human sewage or manure and agricultural. So that's a bit of a flavour of some of the activity. I mean, there's so much more than that, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour. Now over to some of the national framework activities. So we're undertaking at the moment a big method audit. So that's really looking at all of that messy end of the diagram from the beginning of my presentation. All of the methods that are out there at the moment in those, particularly the lower tiers in the tiered framework, and trying to, we've approached it, we've taken a co-design with all of this. So we've had workshops to try and figure out how we're even going to approach this, because it's, the scope is massive here. So we've designed a process, and we've figured out a thematic grouping of methods. We've done some prioritizing of those based on what is in those collaborative monitoring plans, and we've chosen some themes to progress. So we're trying to do a sort of pathfinder approach, figure out a way that we can go from loads of different methods and confusion to, can we evaluate them, agree those evaluation criteria, agree the scores, and then pick a few of them that we then go on and invest in to develop some quality assurance protocols and turn them into training and resources that mean within the demo catchments we can go out and collect data on known quality. And then the whole data systems work package is really about how we can tag that data with that quality. So if you remember that sort of trust issue of getting from where the data are collected to where it's used for decision making, this is the start of that process really. It's getting some agreement on some protocols and some standards. And we've got models out there, things like the Riverfly scheme that we can use as a role model. And that one we are putting forward to the Standing Committee of Analysts, the Blue Book methods that are used by water companies for their monitoring. We're putting the Army Riverfly method through that process to see if we go down the full sort of standardization and accreditation route, will that data be accepted more widely? So we're trying out things like that at the moment. And so far, we're kicking off method audits in a number of thematic areas. So we've got one ongoing on phosphate methods, fish methods with Zoological Society of London leading this, macroinvertebrates. We've got Bill Brierley and Steve Brooks from Riverfly Partnership leading on that one. We've got habitat and hydromorphology that's just kicking off now. And then we've got also one on soils. And outside CaSTCo with some other funding, we're having a look at microbiological methods as well. There are still lots of gaps. So, one of the main aims in CaSTCo is to bring in additional funding. We see this as an umbrella project and with a long-term vision to bring in additional funding to keep the momentum going. For the data systems, there's a whole work package on that, really looking at all of the different aspects of how citizen science and monitoring data are collected, how they're organised and stored, and then shared out with end users and analysts. So a lot of the initial work has been mapping out some of the existing landscape, setting up a data systems working group, looking at some of the metadata models that are out there that we might be able to adopt, reviewing existing platforms and designing some criteria to assess them against, and then developing some guiding principles which are going to then be used to underpin recommendations for investment. So what we don't have is enough budget to sweep all the data platforms aside and build one big one. That's hugely costly and hugely risky. What we're going to do is try and work with existing platform providers to adapt their systems, maybe implementing a metadata standard with them so we can pull data automatically if they have an API, and if not, we've got to figure out how we manage that sort of local data and evidence so that it can be more easily shared. And last few points for me. So one of the things that we're doing is building on some work that Izzy Bishop, who was at Earthwatch at the time, and others did on the pathways to impact for citizen science. So really looking at all of these pathways, it's not just about providing data to decision makers, it's also about all of the stuff that you enact along the way as you engage people in understanding their environment better and understanding the issues. We're seeing this, all over the country where it's leading to people getting engaged politically, engaging their local representatives, changing their own behaviour, instigating real community action, things like designated bathing waters applications. And all of this, can be really enhanced and instigated through better citizen science. One of the things we've developed is an entry-level citizen science programme. We wanted to broaden the reach of citizen science. It does tend to be, quite a narrow demographic and sort of age profile of people who get involved in citizen science across the country. So we want to broaden that out. And Big River Watch is something we launched this year, and we'll be running it hopefully twice a year from now on. And it's really about a simple and fun and easy way for people to get involved. You don't need any training, you don't need specialist equipment, it's just observations on your river. But it's also about getting people connected back to nature. We know there's so many benefits to that, and we want this to act as a gateway for people to get more involved in other types of information gathering. So we had over 5,000 people joining in, nearly 6,000 actually, and 60% of them hadn't taken part in citizen science before. So, that's really fantastic. We're reaching a new audience, and we're starting to output some of the data findings from that. And what we want to do in future is align these simpler methods with other blitzes where we're collecting water quality or biological data, and see what we can do if we use that in a weight of evidence approach. Another thing we've done, we've developed a charter, a set of principles that we've co-designed with all of the different types of participants. These are to sort of guide our partnership work. You can imagine, citizen science activity can quite often lead to conflict, either with landowners or local groups, or where data sets may be pointing in a different direction. So we're trying to set some rules of how we handle those difficult issues. And we also did a piece of work right at the beginning where we co-developed a vision for where we're heading, long term. This is 3 years of funding, but it's about making a transformational change. We want to pull lots of other initiatives along with us, and we're starting to get aligned demos in other countries wanting to join in. So having a clear sort of vision for where we're heading and a theory of change was really important. And out of that process, we've developed things like mission statements and a bit more clarity on what our longer term aims are over the next 10 years, really. That's where we want to get to with this. There's a lot of communication we're doing with policy holders, stakeholders, businesses around this, and trying to sort of bring everyone on board with this vision. And this is my final slide, you'll be glad to know, because I've done a lot of talking. But this is fundamental. It's about people, really. It's not about the data and the techie bits. It's about what you can do if you enable communities to have a say in the health of their local river. If they can contribute data and evidence that actually gets used to make a difference, we know that that's really important to recruitment and retention of volunteers, but also to make people feel like they have ownership of the problem and that they have a connection to their local river. That's everything I have to say. Thank you.